Welcome back to episode 10 of the Invictus podcast with me, Gareth, and Sab. And tonight is the 10th, as I just started with. That's a great way to start. Hopefully, we won't have any audio issues this week because that's plagued me for the last few weeks. But yeah, how are you doing, Sab? How has your week been?
Well, my week, yeah, on Invictus it's been tricky to be polite, but overall it's been a good week. We had a good race commentating on Monday night in the no assists, and we should have an interesting chat again tonight. So I'm looking forward to what we get to talk about this evening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, of course, we're still in the midst of the mid-season break with Formula One, so no race previews or reviews to do at the moment. But that doesn't mean we haven't got plenty to talk about. And Sab and I have been talking during the summer break about things that we can bring to you. And yeah, so as you can probably see in the title, tonight is all about the tracks. And we'll be going through influx of street circuits that we've seen in Formula One. We'll go through our favourite circuits of all time. In fact, we'll do our top five favourite circuits and then our least favourite circuit of all time. And of course, we'll end up with the hot lap question for Sab at the end and a quick roundup of round five in Brazil for the Invictus Racing League, which of course took place over Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday on F1 2019. But of course, just to go off and start with, as usual, my name is Gareth, joined as always by Sab. You can find us on Twitter at GT2_driving for me, at Alan Sabatino for Sab. We are part of the Invictus Racing League, which is Invictus RL on Twitter and Instagram, Invictus Racing League on Facebook, and Esports Racing League racing on GT Sport and F1 2019. And so getting straight into it. Street circuits, do we need them in Formula One? What's their benefit? Would you like to see more or less of them?
I like street circuits, but I don't want it to turn into similar to what Formula E's done, where it's all street circuits. Street circuits are fun because they offer a completely different challenge, don't they, to your regular tracks like your Silverstones, your Spas, and other tracks like it. It brings the walls closer to the racing. The room for mistakes is right down to minimum. You can't make any mistakes at all. Otherwise, just look at Monaco, for example. You are literally in the barrier. They are exciting to watch, but I think the problem with street circuits for me is uh, because they're so tight and can be so narrow at times, it doesn't really promote great overtaking. Monaco's a great example of that with how big the cars are now. It's really difficult for guys to get moves done. I think Formula One it needs to find a fine balance with street circuits. Yes, have them because, like I say, it brings a new challenge. It really gives you the opportunity, if you've been trackside to a street circuit, it gives you the opportunity to really see the cars up close and personal. It is fantastic, especially around Albert Park in Australia. It is fantastic to see, but you don't want too many of them because you just start getting a bit sick of them, a bit bored of them. You want variety in Formula One, and I think what we have now, where we've got Azerbaijan, Monaco, Albert Park has just said, Singapore. You've it's a good balance, and me personally, I wouldn't want more. We've seen rumours, haven't we, of potential London Grand Prix and Grand Prix everywhere else. No, I don't want that at all. Personally, I think we should just stick with that the core base of what Formula One's known for. Your classic tracks like Spa and Monza, Silverstone, and all them, and then just filter in some street circuits as well, just to bring that variance into it. But if we go too far with it, I think people just start getting sick of them, and that magic of street circuits kind of goes then because everybody's just like, oh, it's another street circuit. What is your opinion?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I can understand the appeal of street circuits to some extent. They do, as you say, they offer. You can get much closer to the action, and don't get me wrong, Monaco is on the list of like a real bucket list thing for me to go there. And but it's not really the race you're watching. It's the occasion, isn't it? Because you know that the
Yeah,
majority of the race is a procession, and you know that if any moves are going to get done, it would have to be either something very brave or it's going to be a strategic um, overtake. But yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? Because there are some nice circuits that are street like. You've got Canada, Australia, Singapore, as you said, Azerbaijan. So they are good circuits. But yeah, I am slightly apprehensive about the fact that we see a lot of talk about moving to more street circuits. Of course, we've got Vietnam coming next year, which already by just looking at the track layout, I don't know. I'm not sold on it. It looks a little bit one of those sort of desolate circuits that
Mm.
just will be on the F1 calendar for a while and then will disappear, like we saw from places like India and Korea. And although
Yeah,
they were fundamentally circuits, they weren't street circuits. I feel Vietnam might go that way. I don't know. I can't see the sort of the local interest in Formula One being booming out there. Enough to maintain, because we saw what happened at the likes of Malaysia, where it
yeah,
sort of started off being relatively popular, but in the end the locals were being priced out of tickets, and once that happens, you lose the crowd, and once you've lost the crowd, it's a real sad state of affairs when you've got these fantastic cars racing around in front of a third of like a full capacity crowd. So yes, I mean street circuits do offer uh, possibly a lower crowd limit, because obviously you're trying to fit them into short or smaller spaces, but it does, I don't know, it takes away from the grandeur, I think, of F1, because I think F1 cars are built fundamentally to be on these incredible circuits, to go at full speed and really like at the limit of downforce and of grip, and doing that on a street circuit, it's, that these guys, I mean, we've seen in Monaco for the last few years, it's just a case of the drivers just looking after their tyres and running to
yeah,
prescripted tyre, like, or prescripted lap times, which is, I don't know, it's a bit sad, because whether it's just because of the tyres we've got at the moment, whether it's because of the circuits, it's most likely a combination of the two. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think we need to start going towards the street circuits, because, like you said, it's very much that sort of Formula E's niche at the moment, is going to those street circuits purely because of the way that their cars have set up.
yeah, yeah. I agree. It's a good example, I think, in recent years was Daniel Ricciardo with Red Bull a few years back when his car was pretty much dead in the water, and a very fast Sebastian Vettel behind him just couldn't get past him, and because of how wide and big the cars were, and when he knew to put the power down, Seb in a fully functioning, all singing and dancing Ferrari couldn't get past him, and that's sad really, because it turns into like it's like a safety car race but without the safety car. You're just following the lead around. Yeah, you'll get the odd moments where you'll see some brave moves. Max Verstappen's one to mention there, especially coming out of the tunnel, for example, in Monaco. You've seen a few good moves down there, but apart from that, it's you don't really see anything else, and it's really frustrating. You mentioned Malaysia. I just want to say Malaysia for me, I really liked Malaysia on the F1 game, and watching it. We always seem to had good races, a mixture of weather and stuff. It's just like you say, it's such a shame the locals and the interest just dwindled to the point where they just didn't want to do it anymore. I think the MotoGP still goes there. It is a good circuit. I've had friends who've been out there and said they've really enjoyed it. It's just a shame it went that way. And a track which was renowned for being good for racing and stuff. It's a shame it's in a country like it is, because we're losing out on potential great races, and you don't want to start filtering these good tracks off the calendar just to bring in niche markets like Vietnam, like you say, just to get a quick buck or two for a couple of years and then move on to the next thing, because you're just going to start frustrating people then, because people don't want that. People, the vast majority of people I speak to, for example, and you might agree, is you want the core main tracks, what you have grown up with and you've loved for your entire life of watching Formula One, and then bring in the special races like Singapore, for example. Singapore is usually one of the better street circuits, isn't it? But another one for me, which always seems to suffer. You brought up Malaysia, is Bahrain. That always seems to be dead. Whenever you watch like practice or qualifying, there don't seem to be anybody in the grandstands, and it's such a shame because you don't. I understand why they go to Bahrain because of the money, but I'd much rather them just sacrifice that money and say go back to the Nürburgring, for example, or somewhere like that, somewhere iconic. It's just yeah, I just find the whole situation with tracks in Formula One at the minute a little frustrating because you've got a lot of tracks, very very historic tracks, just on the edge of staying staying in within Formula One. You looked at Silverstone; they just about struck a new deal with Formula One this year, and it shouldn't be like that. These tracks should be nailed on to be on the calendar every year, and then they put every other track around those tracks to fit. That's how I believe they should do it, because that's what the majority of people want, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I agree. It's you do want these street circuits sort of be that kind of attraction in between races to kind of break up and kind of throw in that little bit of danger to maybe spice up a season. But I think as soon as you start exposing your season to multiple street circuits, you start to, I don't know. I think it kind of takes away from the shine of what we see from the likes of Monaco, where people look forward to Monaco, and although like we know that it can be a boring race, and we have seen, like you said, with Daniel Ricciardo, like just being able to lead from the front without being able to really be challenged from behind. But it is still one of those iconic circuits. But it's because of the obviously the story behind it and the fact that it's been on the calendar for so long. Whereas I don't know, I can't see some of these tracks that are currently on the calendar, these street circuits are on the calendar, being on there for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years, like we've seen from the likes of,
Yeah,
or at least not Silverstone, but at least like the British Grand Prix, and it's sad because we're potentially losing tracks, like you said, like Nurburgring, like even Hockenheim. We're potentially
yeah,
losing Spain next season. And although I've never been a massive fan of watching the Spanish Grand Prix at Barcelona, it's still a circuit that has been on the calendar for a while. The drivers like it, but then we've lost in the past. We lost France for several years. Obviously, after they left Manicourt, it's only in the last few seasons we've gone back to Le Castellet, which in itself is not a great circuit for Formula One. We lost the Netherlands, and obviously we're going back there next season for Zandvoort, but that is yet to be seen how that could be adapted, because at the moment it's not particularly set up to be a Formula One track. Like I said, Malaysia was taken off the calendar, where we're getting this influx. We're getting Baku, we're getting Singapore. There's talk of, like we were talking about earlier, the London Grand Prix. There's talk about a street circuit in Miami. There was discussion about having one in Marrakesh in Morocco quite recently. So it's I think it's very easy for these countries that want a Grand Prix to build a street circuit rather than spend the hundreds of
yeah,
millions of dollars on building a full F1 facility. Because like we were talking about earlier, is you can have tracks like Korea and India that have this huge amount of capital go into building them and get used for four races and eventually just go out of business because they're not sustainable. They can't run to with the finance that F1 expects. So street circuits are more affordable, and for Formula One they probably look more attractive because they can go to these cities and have this, of course, this picturesque backdrop
yeah.
and go around iconic places in cities. But yeah, I think it just takes away from the racing, and unless you really sort of open up a track, like, which is unlikely on street circuits, because obviously you're going to have a lot of probably short straights and right hand corners, or at least very short sort of and tight apexes on corners, because you'll be following the grid of that city. So yeah, it's I can see where Formula One are thinking that it's potentially a way to look at. for filling their calendar. But I would be hesitant to lose some of these big markets. It's a problem because we've seen that Germany has struggled to fill the grandstands, and they alternated Hockenheim with Nürburgring for a few years, and then equally Spain. I think theirs has struggled ever since I believe they took away you're allowed to drink alcohol on the premises. So I can't. I don't, if I'm correct, I think I am. That you can't actually drink alcohol at the circuit, which doesn't sound like much, but obviously that I think that puts off quite a big market of especially tourists going to go and watch that
Yeah.
race. So yeah, it's an interesting time over the next I think 5 to 10 years to Formula One, because I think it would be very easy for Liberty to sign up all of these cities to street circuit deals, and but I think they would be losing a lot of the soul of Formula One if that was the case.
Yeah, definitely. I have a quick question for you right now. Based on the current calendar of street circuits, which is your favourite and why?
Um, if we're defining street circuits as
Proper
uh,
street.
actual on the streets,
Yes.
I see. I'm a big fan of Baku. Um, the I think the circuit works in the fact that it's a street circuit, but it has opportunities to overtake. It's got several sections of the circuit that really test out the driver. Like you've got the castle section, which I think is one of the most fantastic bits of cornering on the F1 calendar now. I think if Baku stays on the calendar for an extended period of time, I think that can go down as one of those sort of iconic corners, because it's obviously it's so technical, and the margin for error is right there. Like we saw with Charles Leclerc, you can
Yeah.
just push a little bit too hard, and so I think Baku is probably like. Of course, you can never say that Monaco is not a track that you'd like to visit, but if I was to go for a track, I'd love Baku. I think it's a really good circuit, but it is. I don't know. It's a tricky question because there are plenty of street circuits, or at least the ones that feel like street circuits, because of course you've got the likes of Hungary and Canada and Australia as well. But yeah, I think pure street circuit, it's got to be Baku.
See, I thought I'd put you to the test there. Did you see that? But for me, I'd go. You pretty bang on with Baku. I really up there with Baku. I wasn't sure about it at first, but like you say, the cattle section and everything else is absolutely fascinating to watch. But for me, I'm just gonna put Singapore just ahead. I've always loved Singapore. It always seems to throw up an interesting race or two. We've seen that big crash a few years back with Kimi and Seb and everybody else all at the first corner in the rain. It's the cars look fantastic under those very bright floodlights. It's one of those circuits. I think I've always wanted to visit Singapore to watch the racing there. It's just just for me, just it's just one of those iconic tracks now. It's known for its night racing. A lot of other tracks recently, like Bahrain, have followed suit, haven't they? And Abu Dhabi has followed suit with what Singapore do these days. But for me, that has always been known as the original night race. And in the modern era of street circuits, I'd say it's probably the best. It's a shame because I would probably, out of all the street circuits, probably put Monaco at the bottom of them just because of the other ones we get better racing. And yeah, you could go to Monaco for the glitz and the glamour because it's Monaco, and I've always wanted to visit myself. It's just if you're going to go just purely based on watching a race, it's probably not the race to pick out of the street circuit. So yeah, I'd just pick Singapore, but it's close between that and Baku.
But it's interesting to think, would you say Monaco is worse now purely because of how the cars are? Because obviously the cars are a lot more reliable. They can stay out on track longer. They're much wider, so it's much harder to overtake. Whereas I think if you go back to like the 80s and 90s, and even into
Yeah,
like sort of like the early 2000s, where you had more cars on the grid, You had driver error was much higher because obviously they're not as electrically sound as they are now, and equally mechanically sound as they are now. So that's where it could really throw up some really interesting battles. Of course, you had Senna when he was chasing down Prost in the rain, and I cannot. Was it the Tolman he was racing for at the time? I think it was the Tolman, and so it was a team that came out of nowhere, and it was just purely on driver skill. And is it because we have these cars now that do not break down? Well, at least if they do, it's very very rarely that causes the dislike for Monaco, or is it fundamentally because the track is flawed?
I'd probably agree. It's probably the cars. If you had smaller, lighter weight cars of the past for today, you probably would get better racing around Monaco. You've seen how big the cars are. There's been on the internet a while ago. There was a comparison between the 2007 and 2008 cars compared to this year's cars, and the size difference was incredible. You'd think there was one was a micro machine and one was a full scale one. It was incredibly different the cars. So if the cars today were smaller, lightweight, and a bit less unreliable, then we probably would, like you say, have better racing around Monaco. But because of how tight Monaco is, it's suffering because of what F1 is now bringing to the table. Whereas you like to see Singapore's and your Baku's, which are compared to Monaco much wider. It's still allowing good racing. But if Singapore and Baku was just as narrow as Monaco, I think we would suffer from the same fate as what Monaco's suffering from right now. But me personally, I couldn't still take it off the calendar, even if
No.
the racing's not great there at me. You
Yeah.
just can't take Monaco. It's one of those tracks, isn't it? You can't take that off the calendar, no matter how poor the racing's been the last few years. It's one of the races you always look to, don't you? When the season starts, you always say, "Oh, Monaco's one of the races." You always enjoy watching, despite if like Daniel Ricciardo leads with half broken car. You just want to watch Monaco, don't you? And like we both said, you do. Everybody, F1 fan, always dreams of going to watch a race around Monaco.
Yeah, and I think it's a track that drivers, whether you're racing in real life or if you're even racing on the game, if you're racing on any Formula One game, you want to win. And so I
Yeah,
think if you take that away, there's probably only a few circuits on the F1 calendar. Obviously, all drivers want to win their home races. Silverstone is up there, Monza is up there with races that drivers always win. But Monaco is usually the one that's their crown jewel because it's such a
yeah,
difficult circuit. So I think it would be tough to take it off the calendar. I think you'd find a lot of people in the F1 paddock sort of disappointed with Liberty if they decide to move away. What I'd like to see is, and the King of Monaco, or the King of Monaco, or Prince Monaco, can't remember which one it is, Prince Monaco, I think, it's Prince Albert, and
yeah,
he's talked about adapting the circuit and making it slightly longer in the future, which would be interesting. And he wants to add a slightly longer straight that goes into the tunnel. So you'd go when you come out of the Lowe's hairpin, you'd go left instead of going right down towards down through the tunnel. So yeah, I mean, there's potential that it could be completely changed in the future, which may change our perception of it. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that because I think Monaco probably will stay on the calendar. You'll get its detractors each season that say it's a boring race, and sometimes they're right. But I think it is one of those circuits like the likes of Silverstone, like Monza, that you can't really expel from the calendar just because of the lineage that it has, and obviously the famous names that have driven around the
yeah.
Principality. But as we were discussing sort of several circuits that we enjoyed, like Baku, but now we'll go into our top five circuits of all time. And not
Mhm.
just street circuits, of course, can be on the calendar now, it can be off of the calendar. And we'll start with yours, and we'll go for you, Sab, with your top five of all time.
I'll start from fifth, going up to first, and mine is based purely on when I started to get into Formula One more regular than I did. Obviously, you've been watching Formula One longer than I have, so you've probably got some circuits that maybe I didn't watch or catch at the time, but I'm just basing it on my experiences of going to races and stuff and what I've enjoyed since watching Formula One. So my fifth place track is Interlagos, just because before Abu Dhabi come onto the calendar, it was always, well, for me, it was the last race of the calendar. We always had superb final races there. We had 2007 when you didn't know if it were going to be Hamilton or Alonso, and then Kimi stole it. Then you had 2008 with Lewis on the corner with Glock slowing down and Lewis stealing the win from Massa. You had that, yeah, I can't remember what year it was now, when Seb spun his Red Bull and it looked like his title was over. So Interlagos, it's always thrown up a great race. It'd be a huge shame if it comes off the calendar for that other proposed track. It's always had mixed conditions as well. So yeah, I'm going with Interlagos for my fifth. The next one is just based on my experiences. I'm going for Albert Park, Melbourne, simply because my experience there for the last 3 years and the enjoyment of seeing racing cars on a street circuit that close, flying around at 200 miles an hour, it was just absolutely incredible. The noise, the just the smell of the cars, everything about it was absolutely incredible. It's such an experience. Australia, as we all know, is very, very far away from most of us, but if you ever get the opportunity to go, I highly recommend it. Number three, I'm going to go with the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve. Never said that wrong. Canada, just because that again always goes absolutely nuts when it wants to. We've had so many great races. I'm obviously going to bring up the 2011 race, the 4.5 hour race with Jenson Button winning at the end. We've always had fantastic battles there throughout. So yeah, for me again, Canada's definitely up there for me. Second one, it's got to be Spa for me. Spa-Francorchamps, it's one of these circuits. It's just incredible. I've been to Spa-Francorchamps not for Formula One, for GT racing, and just to witness that place, to witness Eau Rouge and Radion and all the other famous corners is just absolutely incredible to see that place running with the Ardennes forest wrapped around it, and see at the time see the GT cars flying around there at 1 o'clock in the morning at full throttle is just insane. So just imagine Formula One cars around there, it'd be incredible. But we've also had superb races around Spa-Francorchamps, as we know. It's always got mixed conditions. You never know if it's going to be blazing hot or freezing cold and rain. It's always, for me, it's always a race I look forward to, which is coming up next on the F1 calendar. And finally, for me, it is Silverstone, simply because it was my very first race I ever went to at Silverstone. I sat in freezing cold weather with 6 layers on in the middle of July. It was tipping it down, and I had the best time ever. I've met a lot of F1 drivers there, not to brag, and I've had some very, very good experiences there. Met a lot of great friends there. Yeah, Silverstone's not everyone's cup of tea in terms of the circuits and the prices and stuff, but for me, just because of the atmosphere and everything else, and just what it means to me in my history, Silverstone is my favourite track.
That's a decent five there. We might match up on a couple on that, and yeah, I don't know. There's someone there that I would disagree with, and I'll explain my reasons why very shortly. But yeah, I obviously being out in Australia, you have that authentic experience, and I think that you get there's a real buzz there in Australia because it's the first race of the season. So
Yeah.
I think that's one that's always been on my list to go down to eventually. So that'll be good. But we'll see if it matches up against. Do you have any that kind of just missed the cut?
I'd say Monza just missed the cut. I always like Monza. It's one of the fastest tracks on the calendar, is it? I've always wanted to go to Monza. Yourself, you're doing that. I'm very jealous of that. I would very much like to do it one day, just to see the passion of the Ferrari fans, and it, even though I'm not a Ferrari fan, if you got to witness a Ferrari win in Monza, I can imagine it'd be pretty special to witness. Monza was very close. I also what another track what was very close. I also like a lot is the Circuit of the Americas. It's
Right.
it's relatively new on the calendar. Was it 2011, 2010 it came, something like that. But I think we've always had good races there. We've always had, especially that long straight down the back. We've seen some good overtaking. We've seen Lewis Hamilton crowned champion there in recent years, and for me, I've always enjoyed. I've one track I've always wanted to visit, and you've got that unique start where you're racing uphill into that left turn, which is slightly different compared to some circuits. So yeah, those two for me was quite close. But just one other one before you get on. One track what we didn't mention earlier, which I think F1 does miss, is Turkey. I thought we always had great races at Turkey. It was one of the times when I was really getting into F1 when Lewis and Jensen was fighting amongst themselves in their Vodafone McLaren days, and for Mark Webber and Seb crashing into each other in the Red Bulls. So it's a shame Turkey's gone. So I'd like to just chuck that in the mix as well. So there were three tracks that I was thinking about if I hadn't have gone with the five I picked.
Yeah, and of course, if you do get a chance to go out to the Kota circuit, and Austin is one of the best nights out on the planet. So it was really, really decent time. So yeah, that's another one I'd love to go down to Austin if I had the chance to get down there. I believe it's like November, so it'd be a nice time to get down there. Not too hot, and yeah, a nice circuit. My special mentions, I've got Imola. I think Imola was a brilliant track, unfortunately marred by, of course, the unfortunate death of Ayrton Senna, and it kind of really hurt that circuit. And I think after that it was sort of crawled on for the next few years, and eventually came off the calendar in the mid 2000s, I think. So yeah, Imola was on there. The Canada I've got on as my special mention. It's another one I'd love to go to. We've had, like you said, have fantastic racing around there. And where else did I have on my special mentions? I had Spa and Bahrain. I actually really like Bahrain as a circuit. Unfortunately, it's not too popular with the locals, but I think it's given us some absolutely fantastic racing in the past. And it's got plenty of overtaking positions. I think at night the looks of the cars look beautiful, and against the desert backdrop, I think it works really nicely. So yeah, Imola, Spa, Canada, and Bahrain just missed the cut for myself. Number 5 for me is the old Silverstone layout. So not the new one, it's the old one, which of course had the bridge section. Um, I just think the old layout was more fun. I much preferred having the track in the old layout compared to what it is now. Of course, the last corner being Luffield. It maybe makes the likes of Cops Corner not as interesting. But yeah, it was the old layout with me was always sort of like that's the one I grew up watching. So ever since they moved it to that new arena layout, I never really engaged with it. And it's of course Silverstone is an iconic circuit. It's been on the F1 calendar for years, but I don't know. It's the old one that kind of sticks in my heart as what I wish they would go back to. Number 4 is the old Hockenheim layout. Not the one that we see nowadays, where that goes toward where you have the second corner, you go right into that long straight before the hairpin. Back in the 90s, and well, sorry, I say in the 90s, from the 60s all the way through to the 2000s, you would go straight on, blast through into the forest, and it was absolutely incredible. And they added chicanes in as the years went on because, of course, you had the deaths of Jim Clark and several other drivers along the main straight, and so they did add in 2 chicanes onto the circuit. But it was just a sight to be seen because it was just V12s, V10s, and then V8s just absolutely flying across trees on either side and braking maybe 3 times in about a minute before they came back out into the arena section now that we see where the Mercedes Stadium is. So yeah, number 4 for me is the old Hockenheim layout. Number 3, I've gone with one of your top 5. I've gone with Interlagos in Brazil. I love Brazil. I think it's a fantastic circuit. It just looks old. I don't think it's changed ever. It doesn't, but I don't think it needs to. I don't think it needs to be revamped. And yes, they are talking about moving it to Rio, and there is the issue of course, with the safety surrounding the drivers and the teams. We always hear about unfortunate events with the crime and going on around the circuit, and that is unfortunately it is situated sort of just next to the favela of Interlagos, so it's not in an ideal spot, but as a track and what it offers with racing, I think it's second to none. It's a fantastic circuit. Of course, you had the one of the most iconic moments of all time with Ayrton Senna winning there, where he had to get lifted from the cockpit, and yeah, it's one of those ones that, and of course we raced it last night, and we'll get onto that bit later. It's one of those ones that you really love to do well around, because I just think it flows really nicely. It's a tricky circuit. It has a lot of off-camber corners, a lot of inclines, declines, and the weather conditions always make things very interesting around there. So yeah, number 3 for me is Brazil. Number 2 is Monza. So, as you said, I'm delighted to be going there for my first ever Grand Prix. I've seen qualifying before, but I've never actually been to a race weekend. So, I'm going to Monza. So that's my first Grand Prix, and it's another one. It's just a brilliant circuit. And whether you go for the layout they have now or you go out for the layout they had sort of in the 90s and the early 2000s, I think they're both relatively similar, so I'm not too fussed about it. But um, it's just it's one of those tracks that I remember sitting growing up when I was sort of 7, 8, 9 years old, and just watching the Ferraris, the Williams, the McLarens, just blast around there, and just the scream coming out the back end of the V10s and then into like the V8s, and it was just one of those circuits that I always dreamt about going to, because it's just it's iconic, and of course you've got the podium that sticks out over the pit lane into the like sort of swings around over the edge of the circuit, and you've got the Tifosi, and it's just that's going to be mega when I'm there. It's going to feel very real, and unfortunately, it won't be as noisy as I was hoping it to be, but it's nevertheless number 2 on my all-time best circuits. So number 1 is, and I'm very biased because I grew up not too far from it,
Hmm.
and it's I will fight anyone that says it's not the best circuit in the UK, and that's Brands Hatch. Um, and
I had a
Brands Hatch.
feeling you were going to pick that. Sorry.
So Brands Hatch is a magnificent circuit. It offers everything. It's got the first corner, Paddock Hill Bend, is a blind right-hander that goes down the hill, up the hill into Druids, which is just so much fun. Luckily, I've raced a single seater around there, and it's just an absolute dream. It's really tricky. It's just a fun circuit. It's tight, it's narrow, but it offers plenty of overtaking for. Well, back in the day, of course, it was the sort of the 70s and the 70s with James Hunt that won around there, and yeah, it's probably not a layout that the current F1 cars would be able to do, because it is just not designed for Formula One cars anymore. Unfortunately, it works perfectly for the likes of touring cars, GT cars, and DTM, and that sort of saloon car racing now. But I've always watched back the racing around Brands Hatch from like the 70s, because it was just incredible, and you're so close to the action. The paddock is completely open, you can just wander around it, and yep. So Brands Hatch, it wasn't on the calendar for long, but for me, it is my favourite circuit of all time.
Yeah, I thought about Brands Hatch myself. I've been to if I can speak. I've been to Brands Hatch once, and I thoroughly loved going down there watching that. I again went to go and watch some GT racing at the time, and it is incredible to think that at once upon a time, like you say, F1 cars were racing around there. I'd love to have witnessed that myself. It is an iconic circuit. I'd love to visit more often, but it's just unfortunately a bit too far away from me. It's a good 3.5 hour drive just to get to it. So unfortunately, it doesn't really hold that much to me compared to yourself. But I can definitely see why it's your favourite track. It's one of those tracks, isn't it? It breathes so much history, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, and it is one of those tracks that you can kind of you can sit on a game and you can pick it up very easily. It's a very addictive track to drive around, whether you're doing it on F1, Project Cars, GT Sport, all the likes. It's just a fun track to drive around, and I think that's why I think they had it on F1 2013 as a classic circuit, and yeah, that really took me back. They had that sort of like yellow hue across the screen to make you feel like you were driving in the 70s, and yeah, it was it's definitely one that if I could go back and watch a race throughout history, that would be up there. And but that's our top five. So we won't do our top five least favorite, but we'll do your all-time least favorite circuit. So if you want to go first, what is the worst one that's ever been on the F1 calendar?
Ever. Phew. Can I go with one? See, again, you've been watching Formula One much longer than me, but I'm just going to base it on recent times, if I may. And I cannot stand, and I even fell asleep watching this Grand Prix this year. I cannot stand watching the Chinese Grand Prix. I think it's absolutely awful, the Chinese Grand Prix. It's always on, for us, it's always on at stupid o'clock in the morning. There's nothing ever happens during a race. You've got that nearly 2 mile long straight or whatever it is, where you sometimes see some incidents, but for the rest of the track, it's like they're driving out in the middle of the countryside. You've got that obnoxious great big stand with the big advertisements on it, and then they go off driving into the rest of the circuit, and they've got grandstands covered up with nobody in them, and it's just like it just seems like a waste. You've got driving around on this circuit and nobody's there watching it apart from that massive grandstand that looks down onto the pit lane. It just looks like an awful track to go to. I've had friends who've told me they've not enjoyed going there, and and like I say, this year when I got up to watch it in the morning, I fell asleep watching it because it wasn't that great either. I've just never ever enjoyed watching the Chinese Grand Prix.
See, I enjoy driving around it on the game. It's one of the tracks I enjoy the most. But yeah, I can agree. There's not much soul to the circuit, which is a shame because it's not
No,
that far from Beijing. So you'd think that obviously it's relatively accessible. But yeah, obviously not particularly popular with the locals. But it's a good PR tool for the government to have it on the F1 calendar. So I would imagine that's why it's on the calendar. But talking about PR for local governments and why it's on the F1 calendar, my least favourite, and if I could erase it from the history of Formula One, I would do it in an instant, Thanos style, would be Abu Dhabi. I
oh wow.
cannot stand that circuit. I cannot stand watching it. I cannot stand it's the last circuit on the calendar. I cannot stand it being on the game. It's there is nothing redeeming about that circuit. It looks boring. I don't think we've really ever had a good race around there. I don't think there's that many overtaking positions really that make it fun to watch. Or congratulations, you've got a pit lane that goes under the track. That's new, but that's about the most interesting thing about the circuit. It's there is no life to that circuit, and the fact that they give F1 a lot of money so that it is the last race on the calendar makes me very sad because back in the day it
Yeah.
would have been the likes of Brazil or Japan or Australia, and unfortunately now it's Abu Dhabi, and it's another one of those tracks. There's a whole lot of nothing there. There's about three stands that you can usually see, and yeah, it's I don't know. I've never ever enjoyed it. Even from the first time they ever went there, I just thought it's all a lot of wannabe glitz and glamour. Of course, you've got the nice hotel and the Scordy hotel that they drive under, and if you can afford the whatever it is, $2,000 to $4,000 a night to stay there, then more to you. And I'd do it if I could afford it, but I would do it purely to be at a Formula One race rather than watch them go around that circuit. Because yep, F1 driving around Abu Dhabi, my least favourite.
It's, it's hard to argue with that, really, and especially on the point of it being the final race of the year. That is sad for me because when I was watching it, when my team was doing well, it was always a battle of Brazil, and you always got a good race, the final race at Brazil, and it's sad now because, like you say, the racing's not that great really there, is it? So, yeah, I can agree with you on that one. To be fair, it'd be interesting to know as well. After now we've revealed our top five and our least favorite, it'd be interesting to know if the people listening. What their opinions are. I'd love to hear what they have to say because I'm sure there'll be people out there that completely disagree with everything we've just said the last 20 minutes. But that's good because I love to hear what people enjoy about Formula One races and why and why they completely hate them. So it'd be very interesting to hear what they have to say.
Yeah, absolutely, and I completely agree. So if you are listening, guys, and you want to let us know, tell us that we're wrong and that you're definitely right, then do drop us a message on our Twitter, of course, GT2_driving for myself, Alan Sabatino for Sab, and then of course you can also drop it into the comments when the race or when the podcast is posted in on Facebook. So yeah, let us know what your top five circuits and your least favourite circuits are. It'll be really interesting to find out, and we're more than happy to continue the conversation on. But for now, for the last 10 minutes, we'll quickly go over this week's racing for Invictus. It was the fifth round of 12, so one more round for the mid-season break, and so next week we go to Spa. But this week it was Brazil and Interlagos, which made both of our top fives. So it was one that we were both looking forward to, and we started off on Monday night with the No Assist Championship, of course, 8 p.m. here on Twitch.tv. In fact, on this channel. So if you want to catch Sab and I commentating on that one, click the follow button that is right next to the screen. But it was White Fountain that took the win on Monday, and it was a fantastic race for him, and it was. Well, watching it back, I kind of you never really knew what was going to happen, did you? Because obviously the
No.
conditions really worked in his favour, and it was just an exciting race in general.
It was an exciting race, and one, I'll be honest with you, one I found quite frustrated because I was trying to like give everybody else coverage, and every time I started talking about somebody else, Sam and everybody else at the front decided they were going to have a massive battle, and I'd always end up missing it, and you'd end up having to try and catch everybody up. But it was battles throughout the race, which was it was great to see. We didn't expect White Fountain to do what he did with his strategy, but a little sprinkling of rain at the end probably helped him with the guys on older tyres at the end. But he thoroughly deserved it. He got his strategy call absolutely bang on and fully deserved that race win.
Absolutely. Started on the hards, went to the softs at the end, which meant that he had the advantage over the guys in front. That rain at the end really helped him. And yeah, the Belgian overcame Scopefielder on penalties. Unfortunately, Scope crossed the line first, dropped to second on penalties just at the end of the race. But we saw the likes of FPL Charlie, who came in third, just beaten out on the line by Sammy the Pitto by a few thousandths of a second, but unfortunately Sam dropped back, so he drops off of the podium for the first time this season. So yeah, your top three was White Fountain, Scopefielder, and FPL Charlie. So unfortunately, reigning champion Scott had a really bad day down in, well, retired in with about 12 laps left to go. So Scott, he'll definitely be back on it and practicing ready for Spa next week. But yeah, like you said, it was a fantastic race. We saw battles, side by side finishes for Meg Lugby and Adria Lockdock between it was Humbo Stone and Speed Queen, I think, came across the line side
Yeah.
by side. So yeah, I really enjoyed that one. So That was a really good one to watch. So if you have got some time, guys, go to the YouTube channel, invictusracingleague.com, and check out the no assist race. But yeah, moving on to Tuesday, and it was the Realistic Performance League. And Scopefielder qualified on pole position in the Alfa Romeo. Uh, but yeah, it was Luke Bailey that ended up with the win in the Ferrari. How did the Performance League go for you?
Yeah, it was an interesting one for me. I myself qualified P5 and just had a bit of an issue what ended up dropping me down to P9, but it was a good race for Luke Bailey. He took full advantage of having that Ferrari power. He maximised it from second on the grid to get the one-stop strategies working. He finished just about 7 seconds ahead of Scopefield, and he'll be happy in the Alfa Romeo to pick up a second place with Stephen having a very, very good race for him in the Mercedes, coming home in third place from 13th on the grid. He had a very, very nice race for himself. Ferocious down in the Racing Point, who was also having a good season in performance. He was in the Racing Point. He started fourth and finished fourth, so overall pretty good for him. And Mr. Skyzy, who's usually one of the very front runners, he was in the Williams that night and he came home in fifth. So not a bad turnout for him in the Williams. So yeah, it was a good race in the performance. I'll be honest, I didn't see anything after 12 laps. I was racing on my own for the rest of the race, but from what I've seen back, it was a good race and good battles at the front.
So yeah, hopefully a better race for yourself next Tuesday, and you can catch that Tuesday night 8 p.m. with Malk and Tim in the commentary box from 8 p.m. on Twitch.tv. If you want to find out for the links, go to the website invictusracingleague.com, or on all of our socials. We have links to all of our Twitch channels there. On Wednesday night, it's the Equal Performance League, so 8 p.m. F1, F2, and F3. Unfortunately, no F1 this week. Several people away on holiday, so they had to postpone the race. So we'll go straight to F2. And it was a very interesting race for F2. We unfortunately had a lobby crash to start with, so we had to restart the lobby. The restart was a little bit chaotic. There was a, a bit of a pile up that took out 4 cars right at the start, but the beneficiary of that were the likes of Humbo Stone and Colin Jay, who, starting 17th and 15th respectively, charged through the field, and it went from dry to wet, and it got wet with about 5 laps left to go. And so Warrislander, who started second, great lap in the Alfa Romeo, he managed to really just get out ahead and just stretch his legs from there. He was completely untouchable last night. Took the race victory by 23 seconds to Humbo Stone, who went from 15th to second. Colin Jay went from 17th to third, so he had an absolutely cracking race. And then you had the two McLarens of Meg Lugby and myself coming from 16th on the grid to 5th after a drive-through penalty for unfortunately jumping the start due to me being a bit of an idiot. But yeah, it was a very interesting race. Several retirements, and yeah, it was a bit of a battle royale last night, and it was a real battle of attrition. But it's a fun one to watch back. So F1 or F2, sorry, Wednesday nights 8 p.m. with Energy Dan providing, and in fact he was joined by MJ Coop, who unfortunately was taken out in that first lap incident. So yeah, that was a really fun one to watch. So make sure you watch that one back on YouTube. And on to F3 with yourself. How was F3 for you?
Well, F3 for me. Let's not go into Sab's rant hour. Let's get through it swiftly. F3 for me. I managed to get pole position ahead of Ferocious Dan and BWA Clyde. Um, it was a good start to the race for myself. It was a good battle with Ferocious Dan. Unfortunately, on lap 9, I decided to make friends with a certain barrier, and unfortunately also took Ferocious Dan out with me, and both of us ended up DNFing. Luke Bailey also, he qualified P4. He also DNF'd with synchronously, if I can synchronously even. He also DNF, which left only 8 guys racing in the end, and it was Mike who took the win in the Mercedes, starting from P7. He was a good strategy there with Stephen, having another good race. He had a good racing performance. He had a very, very good race for himself. Started P11, finished second in the Ferrari with Mike's teammate in third, BWA Clyde coming in third. It's been a good comeback for Mike in F3 since he's dropped down from F2, and he's been on fire ever since he's joined us again. But yeah, it was a good battle overall in the race, but unfortunately there was too many incidences which left only 8 people running in the end, which is a bit of a shame that. But huge congratulations to Mike taking the win.
Yeah, and good result for the Mercedes, double podium for them, so that's good points haul for the Constructors' Championship. Special congratulations goes out to O. Stephen, though, who picked up his best ever equal
Yeah,
performance result in second place. That goes with his podium on Tuesday, some consecutive podiums in a row for O. Stephen. So, yeah, well done to him. A driver that puts in 100% effort, doesn't always come out with what he deserved, but yeah, good to see him towards the top, and hopefully we can see him fighting
definitely.
for wins in the future, and equally for yourself, hoping the next 6 wins out or 7 wins out the next 7 races for yourself, you'll win the championship, surely.
Um, yeah, yeah. Um, and I've just seen a pig fly past my window, but yeah, let's not get into that.
so, so yeah, that is the roundup for the Brazilian Grand Prix this week, F1 2019. You got no assist championship Monday, realistic performance Tuesday, equal performance Wednesday, F1, F2, and F3. You can catch all of them on twitch.tv, all streamed, all commentated on, and you can find all of the details about that on our social channels, which I will double remind you with at the end of the podcast. And of course, if you also want to get involved in GT Sport, we have our GT Sport race going on at the moment over on the Invictus Racing League channel, which is equally on twitch.tv at the moment. So if you type in Invictus Racing Leagues, you will find that they are streaming their DTM League, so the DTM League endurance and sprint races on the same night. But then starting on Sunday, we have our LMP1 League starting with their first pre-season. So if you'd like to be involved in that one, there are definitely spaces still left on the grid, and there are reserved spots for Thursday nights, full spots left on Sunday. So yeah, if you want to check that out, go to the website, find out more details about the LMP1 League, with a lot of WEC endurance race style coming up in GT Sport over the next few weeks there. So interesting few months ahead for the GT Sport League. But what we'll do is we'll finally finish up with the hot lap question, and of course Sab is given a question. He's got 1 minute to give his answer and explain the reason why. And seeing as we spent the entire podcast talking about circuits, is a very easy one. I'm sure he'll be able to answer it straight away. And Sab, of course, 1 minute is on the clock. If you could bring back any circuit not currently on the F1 calendar, what one is it and why?
I said it earlier, I'd go with Turkey, just because we've had great racing there in the past, and from what I watched when I was really getting into football, we always seem to have good racing there, and it's just a shame it's not on the calendar mode. We could pick up likes of what you said, Imola and a few others, but for me, I'm gonna go with Turkey.
Oh, straight to the point. Bangs out an answer in around 20 seconds. That's how you do it. He's getting used to these questions. I've got to start making them harder. And
You're gonna have to make them much harder than that.
so yeah, if you agree, guys, let us know in the comments of the podcast, or by going to our Twitter pages, and equally drop in a message in there. Let us know what track you'd like to see most on the F1 calendar that isn't currently on it. But that is us done for this week, and we will be back next week for the 11th episode on Thursday night at 8 p.m. here on twitch.tv. But equally, will be uploaded to iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and hopefully Podbean. And we'll be with you most weeks after that. I think we'll be taking a 1 week break after next week, though, just whilst I am at the Italian Grand Prix. But yeah, we will be back next Thursday. But if you want to watch us commentating next Monday, you can join us, and it will be round 6, the final round of the first half of the season before we go on our midweek break. And we are at the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa-Francorchamps. So, yeah, it's going to be another one of those iconic circuits, and we seem to be banging them out in this first half of the season. We've had some real famous circuits, and of course Spa is up there with one of the best and one of the most iconic of all time. So is it Radion? Is it Eau Rouge? I'm sure plenty of people will be asking
Oh
that
God, oh
question.
dear.
and but you can find out all about how we get on from Monday to Wednesday on F1 2019 next week here on Twitch.tv with Invictus Racing League. But of course, if you'd like to follow us, as I've said before, you can go to GT2_driving for myself for Twitter. You can go to @AlanSabativa. I have said your surname wrong every time this evening. @Alan Sabatino on Twitter. There we go for Sab, and Invictus Racing League on the YouTube and Facebook. Invictus RL for Twitter and Instagram, and of course, click the follow button for more of these streams, more of these podcasts up on the Twitch channel. But for this week, and hopefully if I can actually get my words out for next week and not stutter and stammer as I have been throughout this entire one, we will see you after Spa next week.